There are people right now whose entire world has shrunk to the walls of their home, not because they're physically unable to leave, not because they're under house arrest or quarantine, but because something in their brain has calculated that the outside world is too threatening, too overwhelming, too dangerous to face. And if you think this is just laziness or antisocial preference, the neuroscience reveals something far more sinister. The brain that stops leaving home doesn't just avoid the outside world. It fundamentally rewires itself, creating a neural prison where the familiar becomes the only thing that feels survivable, and every day the walls close in a little tighter. Today, we're exploring the dark psychology of self-imposed isolation, and the research shows this isn't a choice. It's a progressive neurological trap that becomes harder to escape the longer it continues. Let me start with research that quantifies a phenomenon that's been amplified by modern technology and recent global events. A 2021 study published in the Journal of Affective Disorders surveyed over 5,000 adults about their home leaving patterns. They identified what they called severe home confinement, defined as leaving home less than once per week for reasons other than absolute necessity, persisting for at least 6 months. The prevalence was shocking. 8.3% of adults met this criteria, representing millions of people living in self-imposed isolation. But here's what's crucial. Only 22% of these individuals had agoraphobia, the clinical diagnosis typically associated with fear of leaving home. The majority didn't meet diagnostic criteria for any specific phobia. Their isolation was more insidious, driven by a complex interaction of anxiety, depression, social factors, and what researchers called environmental withdrawal syndrome. They weren't terrified of leaving home. They'd simply lost the capacity or motivation to engage with the world beyond their walls. Before we go deeper, you need to understand what happens neurologically when someone stops leaving home. Research published in 2020 in Nature Neuroscience examined brain changes associated with prolonged spatial restriction and social isolation. Using both animal models and human neuroimaging, they found that reduced environmental engagement triggers measurable alterations in brain structure and function. The hippocampus, critical for spatial navigation and memory, showed reduced volume and altered activity patterns. When you don't navigate complex environments, the neural systems supporting navigation atrophy through disuse. The brain literally loses capacity for spatial processing when it's confined to a small, familiar space. The prefrontal cortex, involved in planning and goal-directed behavior, showed reduced gray matter density. Without the demands of navigating the world, executive function systems weakened. Most striking were changes in the reward system. The ventral striatum, which processes reward and motivation, showed blunted responses to images of outdoor environments and social situations. The brain's reward circuitry was recalibrating, finding less potential reward in the external world. The home environment, while objectively limited, was becoming neurologically normalized as the entire universe, and everything beyond it was becoming neurologically irrelevant. Now let's talk about how this pattern typically develops, because it's rarely sudden. A groundbreaking 2019 study published in Behavior Research and Therapy identified what they called the isolation spiral. It typically begins with an initial trigger, a traumatic event, a period of physical illness, a depressive episode, job loss, social rejection, pandemic lockdown, or some other disruption that keeps someone home for an extended period. During this initial period, staying home feels appropriate and necessary. But here's where the neurological trap begins. The longer someone stays home, the more anxiety they experience about leaving. The researchers measured anxiety levels at various time points during isolation. After 2 weeks of minimal home leaving, participants showed 18% increase in anxiety about going out. After 1 month, 34% increase. After 3 months, 67% increase. The isolation itself was generating the anxiety that justified continued isolation. The mechanism is straightforward but devastating. When you avoid something anxiety-provoking, you get immediate relief, which reinforces the avoidance. But you also prevent yourself from learning that the feared situation is manageable. Your brain's threat prediction model never gets updated with disconfirming evidence. Instead, the model becomes more entrenched. The outside world is dangerous. Staying home keeps me safe. Each day of isolation strengthens this neural pathway. The study also found physical deconditioning that created additional barriers. After months of minimal activity, participants experienced fatigue, muscle weakness, and cardiovascular deconditioning that made leaving home physically uncomfortable. The physical discomfort became another reason to stay home, creating a reinforcing cycle where isolation caused physical symptoms that justified continued isolation. Let's examine the neuroscience of habituation and how the home environment becomes the entire world. Research published in 2020 in Psychological Science examined what happens when environmental stimulation becomes severely restricted. They used virtual reality to simulate confined environments and measured neural responses over time. Within weeks of exposure only to limited environments, participants' brains showed reduced novelty response. The brain has specific systems for detecting and responding to novelty. The locus coeruleus releases norepinephrine when encountering new stimuli, creating alertness and attention. The ventral tegmental area releases dopamine in response to unexpected rewards, generating motivation and engagement. When the environment becomes completely predictable, these systems quiet. The brain essentially goes into low-power mode because there's nothing new to process, no surprises to respond to, no novel rewards to pursue. The researchers found that this novelty response dampening persisted even when participants were later exposed to new environments. Their brain had adapted to monotony by reducing its capacity to respond to novelty. The homebound individuals weren't just avoiding new experiences. Their brains were losing the ability to find new experiences engaging or rewarding. The neural machinery for curiosity and exploration was atrophying. A 2021 study, published in Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience, examined social brain networks in people who had been homebound for extended periods. The temporoparietal junction, superior temporal sulcus, and medial prefrontal cortex, all involved in social cognition, showed reduced activity and connectivity. Without regular social interaction, the neural systems supporting social understanding and engagement were weakening. Participants showed impaired performance on tests of emotion recognition, perspective taking, and social reasoning. They'd become less able to accurately read facial expressions, understand others' intentions, or navigate social situations. This created another barrier to leaving home. Social interactions, already anxiety-provoking, became even more difficult as social cognitive abilities declined. They were caught in a trap where isolation impaired the very skills needed to end isolation. Now, let's talk about the role of technology in enabling and amplifying home confinement. A 2020 study published in Cyberpsychology, Behavior, and Social Networking examined how internet access and delivery services affected isolation patterns. They found that technology created what they called friction-free isolation, where all basic needs could be met without leaving home. Food, entertainment, social connection, work, shopping, all available digitally. This removed practical necessities that previously forced home leaving. Historically, even someone inclined toward isolation had to leave home for groceries, work, social obligations. These forced outings, while possibly uncomfortable, prevented complete withdrawal. Modern technology eliminated these forcing functions. Someone could live indefinitely without leaving home, meeting all survival needs through screens and deliveries. The researchers found that homebound individuals spent an average of 11.4 hours per day on screens, significantly higher than the general population's 7.2 hours. The digital world became a substitute for the physical world, providing stimulation, connection, and occupation without requiring physical movement beyond the home. But brain imaging showed that digital interaction activated reward and social systems less robustly than in-person interaction. It was enough to satisfy immediate needs, but not enough to provide the neurological stimulation that prevents atrophy. Let's examine research on the specific fears and beliefs that maintain home confinement. A 2019 study in Clinical Psychology Review interviewed 200 homebound individuals about their thoughts and feelings about leaving home. Several consistent patterns emerged. The most common wasn't specific phobia, but generalized overwhelm. The world feels too much. Everything outside is too loud, too bright, too chaotic. I can't handle the stimulation. These descriptions suggest sensory processing issues amplified by adaptation to low stimulation environments. After months in the controlled, quiet, predictable home environment, the normal level of stimulation in the outside world felt overwhelming. Their nervous system had recalibrated to minimal input, making normal levels feel like assault. Leaving home wasn't terrifying, it was exhausting and overwhelming. The second pattern was social dread, without specific social phobia. Participants described feeling unable to perform socially. I've forgotten how to talk to people. I don't know what to say anymore. Everyone will notice I'm weird. The isolation had created social skill atrophy that made the prospect of interaction feel insurmountable. They weren't afraid of specific social catastrophes. They felt incompetent at the basic mechanics of human interaction. The third pattern was a sense of irrelevance or invisibility. No one would notice if I never left. I don't have anywhere I need to be. The world functions fine without me. These individuals had lost a sense of purpose or connection that would pull them into the world. Home wasn't a refuge from something. It was the only place they still had a role, even if that role was just existing in familiar space. Research on the physical health consequences of prolonged home confinement reveals serious impacts. A 2020 longitudinal study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association tracked health markers in homebound individuals over 2 years. The findings were alarming. Significantly elevated rates of obesity, cardiovascular disease, vitamin D deficiency, muscle atrophy, bone density loss, immune system dysfunction, and metabolic syndrome. The mechanisms were multiple. Lack of physical activity led to cardiovascular and musculoskeletal decline. Minimal sun exposure caused vitamin D deficiency, with cascading effects on bone health, immune function, and mood regulation. Disrupted circadian rhythms from reduced natural light exposure affected sleep, metabolism, and hormonal systems. Reduced environmental microbial exposure potentially impaired immune system calibration. The body was breaking down from disuse and environmental deprivation. The study calculated that severe home confinement was associated with a 23% increased mortality risk over 10 years, equivalent to moderate smoking. The isolation wasn't just psychological. It was physiologically damaging, accelerating aging and disease processes. The home that felt like safety was actually a slow form of self-destruction. Let's talk about the specific experience of attempting to leave home after extended isolation. A 2021 study, published in the Journal of Anxiety Disorders, examined what happens physiologically and psychologically during exit attempts. They equipped long-term homebound individuals with continuous physiological monitoring and had them attempt to leave home while recording their experience. The findings revealed the physical reality of the psychological barrier. As participants prepared to leave, heart rate increased by an average of 32 beats per minute, blood pressure elevated, cortisol spiked, and breathing became rapid and shallow. Their body was mounting a full stress response to the prospect of leaving, treating it like a physical threat. By the time they reached the door, 67% were experiencing panic-level physiological arousal. For those who made it outside, the experience was often overwhelming. Participants described sensory flooding: sounds too loud, lights too bright, space too open, people too close. Their nervous system, adapted to the low-stimulation home environment, couldn't effectively process normal environmental input. Many experienced dissociation, describing feeling unreal or detached. Some experienced panic attacks. Only 23% successfully completed a 30-minute outing on first attempt. But here's what's important. Those who persisted and repeated the attempts showed physiological adaptation. By the 10th outing, stress responses had decreased by 41%. The nervous system could recalibrate, but it required repeated exposure. The problem was that the initial experiences were so aversive that most people gave up after 1 or 2 attempts, concluding that leaving home was impossible, rather than recognizing it as a nervous system recalibration process requiring patience. Research on the social consequences reveals how isolation perpetuates itself through relationship deterioration. A 2020 study in the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships tracked relationships of homebound individuals over 18 months. They found a predictable pattern of social network shrinkage. Initially, friends and family made efforts to maintain contact through visits, calls, or messages. But over time, unreciprocated effort led to relationship attrition. By 12 months of severe home confinement, participants had lost an average of 68% of their pre-isolation social connections. The remaining relationships were typically with immediate family or 1 or 2 exceptionally persistent friends. But these remaining relationships often became strained by frustration, worry, or enabling dynamics. The homebound person felt guilty and ashamed but unable to change. The connected people felt helpless, frustrated, or exhausted by failed attempts to help. The study found that relationship loss created another barrier to leaving home. With fewer social connections, there were fewer reasons or opportunities to go out. Social invitations, which might have provided motivation or structure for leaving, stopped coming. The isolation became self-reinforcing through social network collapse. Let's examine the role of shame in maintaining home confinement. A 2019 study published in Emotion found that homebound individuals scored extremely high on measures of shame, significantly higher than depression or anxiety alone would predict. They felt deeply ashamed of their isolation, viewing it as personal failure, weakness, or pathology. This shame created additional barriers to seeking help or accepting support. The shame also prevented disclosure. Participants described elaborate deceptions to hide their isolation, lying about where they'd been, making excuses for declining invitations, creating the illusion of normal engagement with the world. The energy spent maintaining these deceptions was exhausting and increased isolation by preventing authentic connection with anyone who might help. The researchers identified shame spirals, where shame about isolation led to further withdrawal to avoid exposure, which increased shame about hiding, leading to more withdrawal. The shame wasn't motivating change, it was deepening the trap. Participants described feeling beyond help, too far gone, past the point where intervention could matter. The shame had convinced them their situation was uniquely pathological and irredeemable. Research on attempted interventions reveals what doesn't work and what might. A 2020 meta-analysis in Clinical Psychology Review examined treatment outcomes for severe home confinement. Traditional outpatient therapy, which required the homebound person to leave home to attend sessions, showed 91% dropout rate. The barrier the treatment was meant to address prevented engagement with treatment. Clearly, therapy that required leaving home couldn't help people who couldn't leave home. Telehealth showed better engagement, with 67% completing at least 8 sessions. But outcomes were mixed. Talk therapy alone, even when accessible, showed limited effectiveness. Understanding why you're homebound doesn't necessarily enable you to leave. More effective were approaches combining multiple elements: gradual exposure therapy with systematic desensitization, addressing physical deconditioning through home-based exercise, treating co-occurring depression or anxiety, social skills retraining, and addressing practical barriers. The most effective interventions involved in-home initial sessions where therapists came to the person, gradually transitioning to supported outings where the therapist accompanied them outside, slowly fading support as confidence built. This approach showed 58% success rate in achieving regular independent home leaving by 6 months. The key was meeting people where they were, literally, and providing scaffolding for graduated re-engagement rather than expecting them to suddenly be able to function normally. Let's talk about the existential dimension of severe home confinement. A 2021 qualitative study published in Existential Analysis explored the lived experience and meaning-making of long-term homebound individuals. Participants described a profound loss of meaning and purpose. Life had contracted to mere existence, day after day of identical routines in identical spaces with no progression, no growth, no narrative arc. Many described feeling already dead in some fundamental way. I'm just waiting to die. I'm a ghost haunting my own apartment. I stopped living years ago. I'm just here. The home had become both womb and tomb, providing safety but no life, protection but no growth. They existed in a state of suspended animation, neither fully alive nor dead, trapped in an endless present with no meaningful past to draw on and no imaginable future to move toward. The researchers found that this existential crisis often predated severe depression. It wasn't that depression caused meaninglessness. The confinement created conditions where meaning became impossible. Meaning requires engagement with something beyond yourself, challenges to overcome, connections to others, purposes to pursue. Home confinement eliminated all of these, creating an existential void that then generated depression as a response to meaninglessness. Research on neuroplasticity provides both sobering and hopeful insights. A 2021 study in biological psychiatry examined whether brain changes from prolonged isolation were reversible. They studied individuals who had been severely homebound for 1 to 5 years and then engaged in intensive intervention involving gradual re-engagement with the outside world over 6 months. Brain imaging before and after showed significant neuroplastic changes. The hippocampal atrophy partially reversed with resumed environmental navigation. Prefrontal cortex density increased with renewed goal-directed activity and decision-making demands. Social brain networks showed improved connectivity with regular social interaction. Reward system responses to external world stimuli strengthened with repeated exposure. However, the recovery wasn't complete. Even after 6 months of successful re-engagement, brain function and structure didn't return to pre-isolation levels. Some changes appeared lasting, particularly in individuals who had been isolated for longer periods. The brain could recover, but it bore scars. And the recovery required sustained, uncomfortable effort over months. There was no quick fix, no sudden return to normal. It was a slow, difficult process of relearning how to exist in the world. For those watching who recognize themselves in this description, who realize their world has shrunk to their walls, I need you to hear something crucial. You're not lazy. You're not antisocial. You're not choosing the easy path. You're trapped in a neurological pattern where your brain has recalibrated to view home as the entire safe universe and everything beyond as threat or overwhelm. This is a real psychological phenomenon with measurable neural correlates, not a character flaw. But I also need you to understand that every day you stay isolated, the pattern strengthens. The neural pathways supporting isolation deepen. The atrophy of systems supporting engagement with the world progresses. The anxiety about leaving increases. The physical deconditioning worsens. The social skills decline. The shame intensifies. The trap closes tighter. There is no stable equilibrium where you can remain isolated indefinitely without continued deterioration. The way out isn't sudden or dramatic. It's not about forcing yourself to suddenly be normal or pushing through all at once. That approach fails because your nervous system can't handle it. The way out is gradual, systematic re-exposure. It's opening the door and standing in the doorway, then stepping outside for 30 seconds, then a minute, then walking to the end of the block. Baby steps that feel absurdly small but are actually retraining your nervous system to tolerate the world again. It means accepting that it will be uncomfortable, maybe overwhelmingly so initially. Your nervous system will scream danger. You'll experience physical symptoms of panic. You'll want to retreat. But discomfort isn't danger. Your body treating leaving home like a threat doesn't mean it is a threat. It means your threat detection system is miscalibrated from lack of exposure, and recalibration requires experiencing the thing you've been avoiding and discovering you survive it. It means addressing the physical deconditioning. You can't successfully re-engage with the world if you're so deconditioned that walking a block leaves you exhausted. Start moving in your home. Build basic fitness. Prepare your body for the physical demands of existing beyond your walls. It means treating co-occurring depression or anxiety, whether through therapy, medication, or other interventions. The isolation won't resolve if the underlying conditions maintaining it aren't addressed. It means reaching out for help even though shame makes you want to hide. The isolation is shame-based, maintained by not letting anyone see how bad it's gotten. But you can't solve alone what isolation created. You need support, whether from therapists who come to you initially, friends or family who will walk with you during first outings, or online communities of others fighting the same battle who understand the experience. Most importantly, it means rejecting the narrative that you're too far gone, that the isolation has continued too long, that there's no way back. The research clearly shows neuroplastic recovery is possible, even after years of isolation. Your brain can relearn. Your nervous system can recalibrate. Your social skills can rebuild. Your physical conditioning can improve. But none of this happens through continued avoidance. It only happens through systematic, supported re-engagement. The home that feels like your only safe space has become your prison. The walls that protect you from the world's overwhelm are also preventing you from living. You're surviving but not thriving, existing but not experiencing, protected but profoundly alone, and getting more isolated every day. The science is clear. This pattern only worsens without intervention. But the science also shows recovery is possible for those willing to do the hard, uncomfortable work of stepping back into a world their brain has learned to fear. The question is whether you're willing to take the first tiny step, not leaving home permanently, not suddenly being normal, just opening the door, just standing outside for 30 seconds, just proving to your nervous system that the world hasn't actually become as dangerous as your isolated brain believes. Because right now, you're dying slowly in the safest place you know. And maybe it's time to discover that safety isn't the same as living, and that the risk of stepping outside is actually the risk of becoming alive again.